In today's video, I have 3 important strategies to optimize bone health in the new year. I think most of us know that New Year's resolutions mostly fail. But let's look at this a different way. The new year is a time not to just make resolutions that are going to fail, but a time to clarify goals. And few things are more important in our health goals than bone health, muscle preservation, all through the lens of Healthspan. In this video, I'm going to talk about 3 important goals to improve bone health and reverse osteoporosis. But I also want to talk about how to create these goals in a way that you will actually hopefully achieve them. Now, this is, again, not a New Year's resolution. We are simply taking the opportunity to visualize our future and clarify a path to get there. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp, an online therapy platform on a mission to make starting therapy easier. Now, as you know, at Optimal Human Health, I emphasize 6 pillars of health to help you live your healthiest life: nutrition, exercise, sleep, social connection, mindset, and stress. And when we think about mindset and stress, we're really addressing 2 critical areas of your well-being that often go overlooked, but can have a massive impact on your physical and emotional health. But stress is really tough. Whether it's coming from your job, your family, or health struggles, it can wreak havoc on your body by increasing cortisol and inflammation, as well as downregulating your immune system and sex hormone production. In mindset, well, mindset shapes how you handle life's challenges. Mindset is everything, but it's so hard to manage. How do you optimize the thing that is doing the optimizing? It can be really tough. But this is where therapy has been shown to be a powerful tool for managing both. It gives you a safe space to process your thoughts, gain clarity, and build techniques to cope with stress in healthy and productive ways. Whether you're feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or simply looking for growth, therapy can help you move forward. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp is an online platform that makes starting therapy simple and accessible. Here's how it works. You fill out a short questionnaire, and usually within a few days, you'll be matched with a therapist tailored to your specific needs. If you don't click with your first therapist, no worries. BetterHelp makes switching easy and stress-free. Plus, with tools like journaling and group sessions, you can dive deeper into building healthier habits and perspectives. If you're struggling, or if you just want to strengthen your mindset pillar, I encourage you to give therapy a try. Visit betterhelp.com/Dr. Doug to get 10% off your first month. Taking care of your mind is just as important as taking care of your body. It's time to invest in your health, both inside and out. So I'm going to get to my top 3 strategies, but first, let's talk about goal setting. So there are lots of ways to set goals, and probably none of them are particularly wrong, but I like to use the SMART framework. And you may have heard of this, but I'm going to walk you through it from my perspective and through the perspective of bone health to make this a little bit more specific, hopefully, to your goals. So SMART is an acronym, and it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, or timely, depending on who you're reading. So let's start with the first one, specific. Our goals should be very clear and well-defined, answering questions like, what do I want to accomplish specifically? Why is this goal important? Who is involved? What resources or constraints are involved? So instead of, I want to improve my health, a specific goal would be, I want to increase my bone mineral density by doing this, if that makes sense. So let's talk about measurable. And you've probably heard me say the idiom, what gets measured gets managed. And I forget who said that originally, but it's absolutely true. And that's why we talk about measuring both imaging studies as well as biomarkers. We want to establish criteria for tracking progress in measuring our success. So we want to ask ourselves, how will I know when I achieve this goal? What metrics am I going to use? So when it comes to bone health, that could be an improvement in DEXA or REMS, or it could be bone turnover markers or hormone markers or food tracking or whatever. But whatever it is that you're trying to do specifically for your bone, we need to understand how we're going to measure that so that we know when we've succeeded. All right, so let's talk about achievable, the third one. So the goal should be something that's realistic and ultimately attainable. And so if your goal for bone health is, I will reverse my osteoporosis, but your starting point is a T-score of -5 and you have multiple fractures, that's not very realistic. So how about in that circumstance, my goal is to stop my bone loss. Now, that might be realistic depending on the situation, and that would be a huge win. But let's do a more optimistic example. So let's say your T-score is -3 and you have good bone quality and you're in our platinum program and you say, my goal is to reverse my osteoporosis and be in the osteopenic zone on my next rims on this date by doing these things. Now that's realistic. Okay, so let's move on to the R in SMART, and that's relevant. So we want to ensure that our goals align with our broader objectives, values, long-term ambitions, etc. This is why I say when it comes to bone health, we want to improve bone health through the lens of Healthspan. Does that make sense? So we want to ask ourselves, why does this goal matter to me? Is it aligned with my priorities? We don't want to set a goal for something that isn't relevant because we're not going to actually do it. So for me, the example is I want to improve my bone health through the lens of Healthspan, and I know that I'm also improving some other things about my health. So it could be cardiovascular health. It could be some biomarkers around hormone optimization or whatever. But all of those things for me align. So I can continue to work on my bone health, and I can set some goals for myself, which I'm doing in 2025, and I'll share those with you. But I can set some goals very clearly in alignment with my other health goals, if that makes sense. All right, now the fifth one is time-bound or timely. And it's very, very important here that we set a deadline or time frame so that we can create urgency and focus. And I wish that we didn't have to do this, but this is just how our brains are wired. So we have to ask ourselves, when will I achieve this goal? What is my timeline? What are my milestones? So for example, for bone health, I would say I will improve my bone turnover markers by this date, which is 3 months from now, by doing these things. Or I will improve my estradiol levels based on this test by this date. Because believe me, life will get in the way. I absolutely guarantee it. All right, so let's wrap up this SMART goal then. You could say, instead of, I want to reverse my osteoporosis, you could say, I want to improve my bone mineral density, specific, by 5% measurable in my spine as measured by REMS by 12/31/2025. I will track my food, eat adequate protein, use my coach at Optimal Human Health for accountability. I will monitor my bone turnover markers every 3 months, do 100 heel drops 5 out of 7 days per week, and I will use biodensity weekly, and I will use power plate daily, and I will increase my step count to 8,000 steps per day. Now that is a goal. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go through the top 3 strategies for bone health for 2025. And the last one is my favorite, so make sure you stick around for that. Before we get to our top 3 things, let me just mention our free masterclass. This is where we put together the top 3 myths and misconceptions that we see in all of our patients, our Osteocollective members, our YouTube comments, etc. We put them all in one place so that we can educate more people about these things to help them get over these hurdles and improve their bone health. If you're interested in that, you can look for the link in the description on YouTube, or you can go to our website, optimalhumanhealth.com, and you can find a link to register for the masterclass there. Okay, so number 3, I'm gonna do these backwards, is testing. Now, I love biomarkers, and you guys have probably heard me talk about lots of different biomarkers. But the reason why is because it helps with our SMART goals, right? So we know that what we are going for, what we're aiming for, can be measured, and we can set out a cadence based off of actual biomarkers. So we know that what we're doing is working or not working, and we can change. So my favorite biomarkers right now are the bone turnover markers. They are super helpful to monitor improvement in the near term because we know that DEXA can take 1 to 2 years. REMS can take 6 months, 12 months, or longer to see improvement. So we need to know that what we're doing is working in the near term. Otherwise, it's going to take forever to improve our bone health. All right, so let me talk about these 2 bone turnover markers. So CTX is the bone breakdown marker, and that stands for C-telepeptide. CTX is really important because it tells us what's happening with the osteoclast, the cells that are breaking down bone. Now, we want this number to be relatively low, but not too low. We do need some bone breakdown, but we have to compare that then to the bone building. So the P1 and P is the buildup marker. This is the osteoblasts doing their thing. So as osteoblasts build bone, then we're going to see more P1 and P in the blood. So now we can measure only blood, and we can look at both breakdown and buildup. Now, let me take a quick moment here to just mention this other test called NTX. N is in Nancy, TX. So NTX is very similar to CTX. CTX is the blood marker. NTX is a urine marker. It's a little bit older. I've heard CTX is more accurate. I don't know if that's really true, but it's definitely easier to just measure one body fluid rather than 2. And that way we can just look at blood, and we know that CTX and P1 and P are occurring at the same time, and we can just cut kidneys out of that whole equation there. Okay, so let's talk about how we use these clinically, because if you just have one or the other, it actually doesn't help us very much. CTX, again, we want it to come down so that we're not turning over or breaking down bone too quickly. But we also have to build up, and that's why we use a ratio. Now, we started using this ratio a couple of years ago after I saw some researchers do this in some studies. So this is done in the literature. You can do it with NTX too, but it's important that we do it correctly. So we now have done this in hundreds of patients, and it's really, really helpful because we can measure, again, in the near term, what's happening with our program. So the ratio is important to be done in the right way. So this takes a little bit of math, so stick with me. Now, the P1 and P is in different units than the CTX. So we have to adjust for units when we do the math. So stick with me. The P1 and P is delivered in usually a 2 or 3 digit number. CTX also in a 3-digit number, but we can't just divide those numbers together. It won't make sense. We have to adjust for units. Now, the P1 and P is in micrograms per ml. The CTX is in picograms per ml. So we want to stick with the micrograms per ml. So what this calculation looks like is P1 and P as it is, divided by CTX divided by 1,000. And what happens there is you take that CTX 3-digit number and you move the decimal point over 3 places. And now you have something that looks like, let's say, 90 divided by 0.500. And that would be a P1 and P of 90 and a CTX of 500. Okay, does that make sense? So sorry for the math, but we have to adjust for units. And then what that gives you is a 3-digit number, usually somewhere between 100 and 300 if we're dealing with natural levels of P1 and P and CTX. So higher is better. We're still working in our practice to figure out sort of what is the threshold of success. And this obviously takes a long time to figure out. Right now we're using 150. My gut tells me it's probably a little bit higher than that. But so we're aiming kind of 150, 200 is our threshold to make sure that what we're doing is working well. Now I have an entire video on this topic, but a couple more quick things about this ratio. One is, you have to be careful with very low levels of both. So for example, if you're on a bisphosphonate, I think the ratio looks probably unnaturally high or it looks out of context elevated. What I mean by that is the bisphosphonates will drop CTX to the floor. So you'll see a CTX, which is usually between, let's say 200, 500, if somebody's on HRT, over 1,000 if they're early postmenopause without. Bisphosphonate drugs like Fosamax, like Reclast, it'll drop CTX to the floor. And so you'll see a CTX of 40. So we know that the osteoclasts are poisoned. There's not a whole lot happening from an osteoclast perspective. But the downside here is that P1 and P also drops. And so you'll see a P1 and P sometimes as low as a single digit. So then you'll get the ratio, which is 9 divided by 0.040. And it still looks elevated, but it's not because the bone turnover is too low. So again, we're learning more about what is the lower end of acceptable when it comes to the rate of bone metabolism. I don't have an answer for you, but what I will say is if both your CTX and P1 and P are very low, or if you're on a bisphosphonate or Prolia, this ratio probably isn't going to work the way we want it to because you just don't have enough bone turnover for it to be accurately measuring what we want it to measure. Okay, 2 other things about the ratio that matters. So number 1 is how often can you do them? If finances weren't an issue, I would say do them as often as possible, meaning, could you do them every week? Well, in theory, they don't change that quickly. I would say probably the most you would probably want to do it would be monthly. Financially, that's not really rational for most people. So the middle ground would say maybe 3 months if you wanted to be pretty aggressive. In our program, we do it every 6 months unless we're really monitoring somebody coming off of a drug like Prolia or a bisphosphonate like Reclast, making sure we're not seeing rebound bone loss, and then you could do it more frequently. But 6 months is probably sort of the middle ground of where we set our program. I wouldn't do it less frequently than that because I'd just be concerned that you're not going to see the changes that you want to see. So maybe around 3 months, sweet spot if you have the finances to do it, but your insurance isn't going to pay for that at the 3-month mark for sure. And then the last thing about these bone turnover markers is that we want to get them drawn under the same circumstances every time, meaning that you want to do first lab in the morning, same amount of sleep the night before, same day of the week, fasted. You want to basically make every single variable as consistent as possible. So if you did a workout the day before, do that same workout again. If you ate a big meal the day before, do that again. If you fasted the day before, do that again. You want to cut out as many variables as possible so that you can really understand what's happening with these things. They do go up and down a little bit throughout the day. They do respond, especially P1 and P, to food intake. So if you were to measure your P1 and P right after a meal, it's going to be higher, and that could falsely elevate your ratio, even if what you're doing isn't working the way that you think it is. So cut out as many variables as possible and do them with the exact same scenario every time you do the bone turnover markers. Okay, so number 2, the right activity. So we talk a lot about exercise, and you hear lots of conversations around exercise in the Healthspan space, longevity space, bone health space. But the big picture here is we need to do just more activity. Sedentary lifestyle is an absolute epidemic, and we just need to increase our steps, our movement. I'm standing here behind this desk. I need to go out and walk more too. But please understand that's not going to build bone. You'll also hear me say that resistance training is king, and it is, but alone, it won't build bone. We need to do impact or simulated impact. So let me explain what that means. So impact is what it sounds like. Impact is impact. So this could be heel drops, box jumps, doing the assisted pull-up, let go thing from the Lift More trial. All of those things are impact and can help to stimulate bone growth. However, not everybody can do those things. And please hear me. Don't go, jumping off stuff if you have osteoporosis and you're not training and you're not doing this under guidance, because you really can hurt yourself doing impact. That's where simulated impact comes in. So whether it be biodensity locations or the franchise OsteoStrong with osteogenic loading or whole body vibration through a power plate, all of these things can simulate impact and will kind of trick the bones into building bone or that creating that signal to build bone. So we must do impact or simulated impact, whichever is appropriate depending on your unique situation. Number 1, most important thing in 2025 is right nutrition. Now, I have a whole 2025 diet update, but I'm just going to talk about one thing. Track your protein until you understand what it takes to get 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight and what that looks like on you. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you need to change your diet. You need to be a carnivore or a vegan or eat a Mediterranean diet or paleo or a whatever. You get to choose your beliefs. But the number 1 most important thing is eat adequate protein from high quality sources, or if you're eating a plant-based diet, adjust for the lower quality protein intake by eating more of it and mix and match your amino acids so that you're getting complete proteins. Okay, so that's it. Those are the 3 critical things to do for bone health in 2025. So again, test often, right activity, right nutrition. And if you can nail those 3 things, I think you're going to find that it gets much easier to hit your goals, your SMART goals, in 2025 as it comes to bone health, muscle mass, health span, and ultimately longevity. So if you want to come up with your SMART goal, and if you want to do me a huge favor and leave it in the comments on YouTube, we'd love to hear them, and I would love to share them on social media. So create a SMART goal, leave it for me on YouTube, and I'm going to get that out into our social media so we can help support other people in their journey. If you need help, I would encourage you to consider our Osteocollective community. In 2025, we have some exciting changes. We're going to move to an entire new platform, which is going to help both with the community interactions back and forth, but also help for us to deliver the massive amount of content that we have created that is searchable, that can help people to find their own path, because let's face it, everybody's needs are different. And I think hands down, this is, for the price point, absolutely the best place to start or continue your bone health journey, because there's a low monthly cost. There's a 14-day free trial. You really have nothing to lose. So look for that link in the description on YouTube, or you can go to our website, osteocollective.com. That's osteocollective.com. And remember that a diagnosis of osteoporosis is not the end, but deciding to reverse it is a beginning. I'll see you in the next video.